There was this famous quote from a legend, Emmanuel Lasker, that says, "The hardest game to win is a one game." There's a lot of truth to that. I mean, when was the last time you played a solid position? You had the advantage, but then eventually messed up everything and ended up losing the game. Or maybe you played an important game in a crucial round. You knew you were better at some point, only to spoil the position, and then few moves later, your opponent snatched a draw. Or worse, you even lost the game. I was playing white in this game. This was the first round of an on-the-board tournament where my opponent has a lower rating than me. I normally win my first rounds, and I clearly have the advantage in this position right here. I got two extra pawns and my opponent's king is vulnerable. I knew I was going to win. Then my opponent, who plays black, played queen to e6, attacking my rook on b3. Then I went rook to b5 for a mate in 2. I wanted to capture the pawn on a5 and then rook to a8 without a solution for checkmate. And then he played h3. I realized that move can't be neglected because if I take this pawn on a5, then there's a tempo right there with h takes g2 check, which is actually forced for the king to capture. And then there's queen to h3. And then this is actually hard for white to survive. Few moves later, white will be checkmated. So I need to do something with that pawn. Now for some reasons, I just took it. G takes h3. Now, after queen takes h3, I thought it wouldn't matter as I can simply stop his threats with rook f2. And then after queen takes e3, I could just give him my rook and play rook takes h5. And then there's the solution right there, rook h8, checkmate. Now, little did I know, I was the one who's going to be mated because I missed queen e1 check, king g2, and there's rook takes h2, king takes h2, and then queen f2 check, king h3, and then rook h8, and then I resign. Because after king to g4, there's rook h4, and then if I go to g5, there's queen f6, and checkmate. This was a heartbreaking loss for me. It is in fact difficult to win a winning game. Now the questions should be, what should we do to actually win? Our chess masters seem to easily play a better position and win. How can we not compromise? In this video, we'll talk about converting better positions into a win. To make it easier to remember, I'm going to give you 4 P's to put in mind. First, play your advantage. Okay, that's plain and simple. No drama. Realize your advantage and then just push it. Now, I want you to put yourself in this white's player's shoes. The position is still pretty equal here. Black just played d5 to get rid of his isolated pawn. And then white plays d4. That allows black to produce a pass pawn. But that move also shuts down the g7 bishop. The game continues knight e4. Bishop takes e4, d takes e4, queen to e2. Now, there's no way to save the pawn, so black plays an aggressive move, g5. And that g5 to break up white's e and f connected pawns. Then happens knight takes e4, g takes f4. Now, knight d6 has been played next. Now, white is banking on the idea of making his pieces more active. So this is just normal chess right here, and taking the advantage of black's shattered kingside. Now, this is where white's advantage takes place. So what is the advantage? It's capitalizing in black's weak kingside. With that given advantage, white will only just play it. So queen is threatened, so it needs to move somewhere. Queen to a8. Knight f5 is a good move, planning to take down black's best defender in the kingside. So bishop d7, knight takes g7, king takes g7. Now, with the g7 bishop gone, the weakness on black's king side has just gone worse. What should white going to do? Again, just play it. The enemy's king side dark squares are weak, so play bishop h4. Now black plays h6, allowing himself to be down in exchange just to get rid of black's very strong dark square bishop. Of course, white's not buying that. So he needs, he knows that he's not exchanging his strong dark square bishop to black's rook. So again, what is white's plan? Play through the advantage of the position. Dominate the dark squares. So he plays bishop f6. Then king g8, rook to d1, bishop e6, queen h5, king needs to go to h7, and then bishop to g5, and then black resigned. Now you have seen that white was just playing normal chess until an advantage came up. The enemy's kingside was vulnerable to attack. The dark squares were weak. Then the plan was just to realize those advantages and play it. That's why he won. This game features white's advantage in the form of an extra pawn and outside pass pawns. There's no doubt this is winning for him. So how is white going to convert this? Based on his advantages, all he has to do is to push his pass pawns forward, and that's going to work for him quite easily. So he plays knight to b6 first. Rook c7, a4. Now that's part of the plan, right? Rook c2, b4, bishop to d2, knight d5, king f7, knight e4, king e6, knight e3, bishop takes e3, f takes e3, knight f5, and then rook to a1. Now, rook behind pass pawn. White's intentions are actually clear, and that is to push the pass pawns forward and unstoppable seemingly in the point of view for black. Then there goes rook to b2. Then a5, not wasting any time. Rook takes b4, a6, rook b8, a7, rook a8. Now black's rook is tied up on the 8th rank. And the game continues. King f2, knight d6, knight c3, king d7, rook a6, c7, knight b5 check, king b7, rook takes d6, knight c6, and we have rook d7 check, king b6, knight d6, knight takes a7. There is this knight c4 check, king c5, and knight e5. And then after this knight c6, knight takes knight, king takes c6, and then rook takes h7. With 2 extra pawns, white won the game in the end. Okay, you may say playing your advantage is easier said than done. What if my opponent defends well? Or what if there's no way to convincingly win the game? Well, if your opponent is defending well in that area of weakness, try to open another area of attack. And this is where the principle of 2 weaknesses comes in. In this game, white is clearly better. The opponent's rook is tied up in defending an important a6 pawn, which means that black's rook is passive, and that's weakness number 1. The kings are also fighting for space in the middle. Whoever moves first would lose the opposition. If he plays rook to c5, for example, for instance, to transfer the rook and perhaps to the other side of the board, that will allow black's rook to move also and position itself, for example, to the e file, and that is an open file right there. Playing the rook a5 back would allow black's rook to return to the a8 square, and it's just no progress right there. So there's nothing much in the center. But notice the advantage of white in the king side. He's got 3 pawns against black's 2. So if he pushes those pawns forward, that would force black to defend the other side of the board, especially I'm referring to the king side with his king or rook, and allow white to either capture this a6 pawn or maybe the backward c6 pawn and so on. Okay, so white plays h4, rook a7, g4, f takes g4, f takes g4, rook to a8, then h5, then g takes h5, g takes h5. Now he has created a pass pawn, and that is weakness number 2 for black to defend. Now, if black plays, for example, king to e6, then we have h6, and then white will just lure the enemy king towards that pawn, and while he preys on black's weakness here in the middle. So it's going to be a win for black. For example, the game continues king to f6, then h7, king g7, then king c5. This is just hopeless for black. And the pawn right there, the c6 and the d5 pawn will actually be captured, as well as the a6 pawn. In this position, white's powerful passed d pawn has been a heavy thing for black to defend. Although white is clearly in charge, a win still needed to be won. Now white plays h5, and that is to create a second weakness or advantage. And now, black suddenly finds himself defending another weakness in his dark squares, and a potential kingside pawn shatter, because after g takes h5, then this king will be exposed. And also, the threat of h5 to h6, there's a mate on the g7 square right there, would place black's game in a state of chaos. Next, push for endgame. When you have the advantage in a certain position, immediately pushing to reach the endgame may also mean trading pieces, and this strategy is common. Earlier in this game, black played some obvious sacrifices to complicate things out, but he ended up on the wrong side of the bed and did not get the compensation he expected. Now, white is up in exchange, and white thinks that if some of the pieces were gone, then it's going to be rook versus the opponent's minor piece. In the endgame, if you had the advantage, it is best to simplify the position and reduce the enemy's army as much as possible. So the best thing to do for white here is to exchange as many pieces as possible. So he plays knight takes a6, b takes a6. Now we have rook g to e1, forcing the exchange of rooks. Because rooks are well known for a drawn position in the endgame. So black is forced to exchange the rooks. Rook takes e1, rook takes e1. Now it's rook against bishop. This is more simple to play for white. So bishop f7, rook e5. The plan is to actually swing that rook on the queen side and take that weak a6 pawn. And black stops that with bishop to d5. And also the purpose of taking the weaknesses here in white's camp, those light squared weakness on g and h pawns. So what happens next is that it's not going to be a problem for white because that is too slow against a rook. So he plays rook e8, bishop takes g2, rook g8, bishop takes h3, rook takes g6, check, king d7, rook h6, bishop g4, and then rook takes h4, king c7, rook h6, bishop f3, rook f6, and the bishop needs to go back to defend the pawn on f5, and then rook f7, and black resigned. The game is over for black since after, for example, king to b6, there's rook to d7, targeting to take that d pawn, and even if he plays c5, then there is rook to d5, and black's d pawn will soon fall. Also, for example, if I go back after this rook f7 check, if he goes to c8, then black's rook will just take this weakness on a6. Now, I also would like to make it a point that when you have the advantage, and carelessly trading pieces is not a good way to go. In this game, black managed to snatch a pawn for nothing and now decides that he will win the game if he trades up all the pieces. Ignoring his own positional trumps, black actually broke a key rule, and that is to never trade a good piece for a poor one. And he played knight takes e2. Now queen takes e2, bishop to f4, bishop takes f4, and after queen f4, now he just threw away his centralized knight and more active dark squared bishop. Now this gives white the opportunity to equalize. In this game, white should have tried hard different ways to approach the game. Other than just, instead of exchanging those active pieces of his to the opponent's passive ones, he could have created new targets, perhaps put this rook to d file to create pressure on the queen. And if that knight moves, then there is discovered check there, and that is a serious threat. The mere fact that this extra pawn exists he should not force things when nothing yet is clear. One would not be lazy and simply exchange pieces automatically. Having an advantage still requires a middle game plan and some strong moves. Your opponent won't give up without a fight, so don't relax until he lays down his arms and resigns. Put in mind that even the smallest advantages should act as an insurance or endgame odds for now. And lastly, prevent counterplay. This position favors white as it features having the better space and more active king in the endgame. Less experienced players would most likely and immediately play knight to d5 check, right? And that is to exchange the knight. We wanted to simplify the position, right? And end it push the endgame, right? But that is a tricky decision to make because when white's outnumbered pawns in the king side would actually give white some problems later on. So after knight takes d5, king takes d5, then h5 will snatch a drawn pawn endgame. Because after a5, for example, then there's h4 and even losing for white. So instead, the best move to play for white before actually jumping the knight to d5 is g4. Now, white should play g4 first to prevent black's kingside marching pawns forward. And in fact, he could just play anytime that move and also advance his more active pawns and connected pawns in the queen side. And that should have been a win for white. So let us go back to my first round loss. Now, after black's h3, instead of capturing the h pawn, what do you think should have been done by me to seal my win? Now, I want you to pause the video and come think the best way or best reply for white to avoid counterplay from black. All right, we know that white was better in this game. To convert it into a win, white must prevent black from making counterplay. And that is our fourth P, right? So the best move here is simply g3. And black's kingside hopes are gone. I could play rook takes a5 next and rook to a8. And that is going to be a devastating win for white. Now, I hope you learned something today. Always remember, aim to play chess for your advantage. Always seek active play and pluses for your position. And then when you have those advantages, remember the 4 P's to convert them into a win.
Hey, check this video out to make sure that you get more important information to bring your chess to the next level.